Hello, Woodbridge. My name is Scott Prud'homme. I am a 13-year resident of Woodbridge. Moved here with my wife Joy and daughter Claire back in 2013. This past September, I was appointed a member of the Board of Finance and was reappointed back in January of this year. Prior to the Board of Finance, I served on the Economic Development Commission for 3 years here in town. In addition to the Board of Finance, I serve as the treasurer of A Common Ground for Woodbridge. And my colleagues at A Common Ground asked me to provide a little overview of our town budgeting process, generally to inform residents what they need to know, and in addition, provide my perspectives coming out of my first budget process, which will be this fiscal 27 budget that we will see. So Common Ground, we have three key pillars that we do focus on: smart growth, fair taxes, and open doors. So what follows is a 4-part series on our budgeting process designed to provide a fact-based, transparent overview on our budget and our budgeting process. And we're going to break this into 4 segments for you to try to make it as digestible as possible. First, we will talk about our budget background. How does it work? What is a mill rate? What is the grand list? How are your taxes calculated? What comprises the Woodbridge budget? Secondly, we'll have an episode on our past. How did we get here? We're going to take a look at the last 10 years of Woodbridge taxes and the choices that the town has made that have led us to where we are today. Third episode, we'll focus on our present and future. Present being our fiscal 27 budget. I just received my notice in the mail today. And future, fiscal 28 and beyond. What's coming and why, and what will it mean to you? And then a final segment on what we can do and provide an overview of A Common Ground's Fair Taxes Action Plan. So our hope here is that everyone is informed in advance of the April 28th preliminary budget meeting. And we look forward to, and hopefully you can check out all 4 episodes. All right, part 2, the past. How did we get here? All right, so sometimes the best way to understand the present is to take a look at the past. And that's really what we're going to try to cover in this episode, right? How did we get here? The story really begins with how we've managed our taxes over the last decade. So we step back 2015 to 2025, and we focused in on those amount to be raised by taxes. So if you remember from the first episode, this is really the difference between all of our operating expenses and debt service, less any non-tax revenues that are generated by the town. So this and the value of your home are what essentially drive your tax bill. So if you look over that last 10-year time frame, inflation grew about 3.1% per year. Woodbridge's taxes, the amount to be raised by taxes, increased 2.1% per year. So our taxes have actually increased below the rate of inflation over the last decade. So if you take a second, you're probably thinking about this and going, there's no way. My taxes have gone up to a much higher degree than 2.1% per year. This is looking at the town. It's looking at averages over the last decade. But what it does speak to is that the way that taxes are distributed in our town are not necessarily fair. And when Common Ground talks about fair taxes, this is one of the key things that we're focused on. So we're going to give a couple of examples of how those taxes have really not been fair for all of our residents. So we're going to start by talking about a tale of 2 Woodbridge families. So these are fictitious families. First of all, we'd like you to meet the Woods. The Woods are husband-wife teachers in our Woodbridge schools. They moved to Woodbridge in 2016. And they paid in 2016 about $400,000 for a modest home, about a 3-bedroom ranch, let's say. In 2016, that home was assessed at about $286,416. So a modest home. And the Woods really dreamed of that same first class education for their children. Education is really important, and that really attracted them to Woodbridge. So their property taxes in 2016 were about $10,585. In 2021, now the kids have arrived. So young Newton and Eldersley have entered Beecher. They are now in kindergarten and the first grade at Beecher Road School. The Woodbridge, the Woods assessment is now about 281,920. So actually dipped down a little bit post COVID. And their taxes went up about $11,708 per year, or about 2%. In 2025, going forward, their taxes have gone up another another up to about $13,000 per year. Again, about 2% per year. So over a 9-year time frame, their taxes have gone up a grand total of about $2,500. Pretty manageable over a 9-year time frame. Our other Woodbridge family are the Bridges. Professor Bridges and Dr. Bridges are a professor at Yale and a physician at Yale New Haven Hospital. And the Bridges moved to Woodbridge in 1996. They've lived in Woodbridge for 30 years. Their children are graduates of Beecher and Amity. They live in a pricier home. In 2016, their home was assessed at almost $890,000. And their tax bill in 2016 was just under $33,000. Going forward in 2021, the Bridges assessment also dipped, as we saw with the Woods post-COVID. Their tax bill went up between 2016 and 2021, increased to $35,000. So about 2% per year between 2016 and 2021. In 2025, the Bridges tax bill increased to $39,167. So again, the same theme, about a 2% tax increase per year over a 9-year time frame. Pretty manageable in the grand scheme of things. So what happened? Well, as we all know, at the end of 2024, the real estate assessments that take place every 5 years occurred in Woodbridge, and the average assessment in Woodbridge increased by 55% when compared to the last round of assessments at the end of 2019. So this really affected beginning 2026 tax bills. So our family, the Woods, the value of their home, their entry-level home, like many entry-level homes in Woodbridge, increased. Their assessment went up 90% in 1 year. So as a result, you can see their taxes went up 38% in 1 year. They increased from $13,000 in fiscal 2025. Their next year's tax bill was $5,000 higher. When you compare that with our family, the Bridges, you can see that their assessment was basically held the same as compared to where it was in the 2019 assessments, and their tax bill actually decreased. Well, how could this have happened? Because their assessment was essentially held flat, and the average in the town of Woodbridge went up 55%, they actually are going to pay less a share of the taxes in the town. So their tax bill dropped from $39,000 to just under $27,000 in 1 year, a 31% decrease. So it's important to note that the assessments take place in Connecticut. This is not a Woodbridge phenomenon. Every 5 years in Connecticut, real estate, commercial, residential is reassessed. So this phenomenon happened across the state, and in many towns are grappling with significantly higher assessments and the impact of this on their residents, as we just saw with the woods and the bridges. So there are choices. And the chosen approach that Woodbridge decided to proceed with was to maintain these unbalanced tax increases and keep them in place through fiscal 29. It's So it's important to note that the town had options, and one option that the town had that they chose not to deploy is something you may have heard of called the phase-in. So a phased approach would work this way: the assessments, instead of them all being applied in that first year, would have been phased over time for all residents and businesses equally. So what this would have resulted in would have been smaller tax increases or decreases in the case of the bridges. So, for example, with the woods, you can see their taxes, instead of being $18,000, increasing from $13,000 to $18,000 in 1 year, would have increased to just over 15. Then would have been a little closer to 16-ish in fiscal 27, and then finally catching up in fiscal 29. So the impact here is really that it gives these families more time to react to this assessment. Ultimately, and you can see in the case of the bridges, that tax increase, they do get that tax decrease. It's just over time. It's not all in 1 year. And ultimately, they would land in fiscal 29 at the lower taxes. So it would have resulted in smaller tax increases for folks. And honestly, it would have given those hardest hit by the revaluations, and in Woodbridge and in many towns, those that were hit by the hardest by the revaluations are those in the entry-level homes, like the woods. They would have had more time to adjust to the increase instead of having that $5,000 shock in 1 year. There are many different views on the phased approach. Many municipalities chose this direction to minimize the increases. Looking forward, Common Ground is committed to working to identify tax programs or incentives to lessen the impact for these families. And we're very encouraged that the Board of Selectmen recently approved the establishment of an advisory committee on the Board of Finance to identify more options, more alternatives for those that were hit hardest by the revaluation. So the next area we're going to look at with regards to how did we get here is the impact of a shrinking commercial tax base on the average Woodbridge resident. So Woodbridge currently today, when you look at our grand list, right, the value of all the property in Woodbridge, commercial makes up roughly 6% of the overall grand list. By comparison, many other towns, and I'm sure you know who they are, that commercial tax base, that commercial grand list is 20 to 30%. This is a huge difference, right? And as a result, historically, Woodbridge's residents have always paid a higher share due to the fact that we have less of a commercial tax base. The issue has been that over time, that contribution of the commercial tax base to the overall grand list has decreased. So in 2000, you go back all the way back 25 years, the residential tax base was about $783 million. Commercial was about $78 million, or just about 9% of the overall grand list. Fast forward 25 years, that residential grand list has doubled, and the commercial grand list has increased a little over 1% per year over 25 years. So what does all of this mean? Our commercial base has actually shrunk in terms of the grand list over 25 years. That means the higher burden is placed on Woodbridge residents. 9% to 6% is a 30% decrease as a portion of the total grand list. If we were able to get our commercial tax base or commercial contribution to the grand list even back to 9 or 10%, that would have a $1.5 million impact on our overall tax base in town, meaning less of an impact on Woodbridge homeowners, just by getting back to where we were. Again, many other towns are much, much higher at 20 to 30%. So an increased focus on growing our commercial base would have a huge effect. All right, so the third area we're going to look at when we talk about how did we get here are the budget choices that Woodbridge has made over the last 10 years. So this is a slide from the first episode. Woodbridge, we talked about 2/3 of our annual budget goes towards education. Woodbridge has long prioritized education, and you can see, investing 31% of the budget in Beecher, 33% in Amity, really is indicative of that commitment. So when you look beyond education, the other real lever that we have, the big lever that we have in terms of being able to affect our taxes and choices that we make are in the area of town expenses. So this is town government, town services, police, fire, parks and recreation. These are the areas where we can really affect our overall taxes. So when you start to look at the budget choices that we've made, we can start to look at the non-education spending and look at Woodbridge in comparison to many other towns that are around our same size. And you can see amongst this list, it's a pretty diverse list. There are towns in Fairfield County. There are 2 towns that are adjacent to Waterbury, some that are really far out east. But the thing that they have in common is they're running these budgets in Connecticut. They're comparable sized towns. So this is a per capita expense of these non-education or town and services spending. And you can see Woodbridge is at the top of the list. So the opportunity here is to really look at some of these other towns and see how are they able to make that happen. Where are they spending from a non-education standpoint on their towns and their town services? And is there an opportunity for us to really look at the structure of our spending? I'll give you an example. The one that jumped out at me is the town of Reading, pretty close to where I grew up. Reading is comparable in size to Woodbridge. The average house value is pretty close to Woodbridge. The average residential or average household income is pretty close to Woodbridge. They have a regional school system like we do, yet Reading spends considerably less in that non-education spending. And if we were able to really understand that, just even to get our town to, in line with where Reading is spending, that's about $3.5 million a year in tax savings. So you can start to see how these different levers add up. And we talked about this at the end of the first episode. When you start to look at our commercial base, right? Just getting back to a 9-10% commercial contribution to the grand list is worth about $1.5 million. Right sizing our non-education spending could yield us another $3.5 million. There's $5 million in those 2 areas in opportunity to lower our taxes. So then the obvious question is, why didn't taxes rise faster if Woodbridge is spending at such a high rate? We need to go back to, we held our taxes below inflation. We made choices despite having one of the highest spending levels out there. So what does that mean? All right, you spend at a high rate, yet you're holding your tax increases below the rate of inflation. Something ultimately has to give. So when you start to look at where these increases did go, right? So where did the money go? The increases in town government only increased about 1.9%, right? Beecher about 3.2%, Amity a little bit higher. So the total overall budget over the course of time was about 2.9%. So contractual fixed costs consume most of the budget growth. Okay. In a lot of these municipalities, we start to look at the areas of town services and education, right? Fixed costs are a huge component, which means salaries, benefits, contracts eat up a lot of the increases in taxes over time. We did that. Town spending was held below the inflation rate. Okay, so these things go up every single year. In most cases, teacher contracts go up a little over 3%. Town staff, their contracts go up, and then you have utilities that are built in here, a lot of fixed costs, yet we're holding our overall spending lower, right? So as a result, what happened? capital and maintenance were deferred. And we're going to talk a lot about this in the next episode. But over time, over the course of a decade, when you hold that spending below the rate of inflation, and we really try to put a lid on tax increases, even though we have a high tax base, what ended up happening was many capital and maintenance projects were deferred, right? Below inflation growth led to deferred maintenance. Not all maintenance projects, okay, but you're going to see in episode 3 where a lot of these projects are going to start to back up on us. And when you look at $75 million in capital projects over the next 5 years, this is what's on the horizon. We're going to cover more of this in the next episode. But when you look at the 6-year plan, we know that there's a potential for a new beacher, right? On the books right now is a $50 million bonding to afford the new beacher. Well, depending on what grants are, it's a $108 million project. So we'll take the current estimate that is in the 6-year capital plan at $50 million. Amity has a $12 million bond of $51 million worth of projects. Our share of that is over 35%. Then you have various maintenance projects that did not happen over those years that we kept our spending low. Paving our roads, HVACs, almost every HVAC needs to be replaced. Roofs, almost every roof on town buildings needs to be replaced. There's a variety of things in there. That's over $7 million. That's going to have to go out to bond. The center building upgrade was about $6 million. That's on the books right now for the capital plan. A police renovation of $5 million. Environmental remediation. So all of these projects are stacking up, and we will need to take, as presently constituted, over $75 million in debt on over the next 5 years. So how did we get here? Let's recap. Woodbridge taxes are the result of choices that we have made over the last decade. Okay, we chose to forego a phased approach to the 55% increase in property assessments. Foregoing the phase-in was a choice that we made. We have de-emphasized and deprioritized the development of our commercial base. This has increased the tax burden on our residents. We've done a lot in the last 2 years, and we're very encouraged with the addition of an economic development director that is currently in the budget for fiscal 27. But the fact is, commercial has not been a priority, and that has really impacted us. We chose to invest in blue ribbon schools. That's like a non-starter here in Woodbridge. We're going to invest in education. We've chosen to invest in outsized government and services. We have done this year over year. We've tried to manage these tax increases to keep them low, below inflation. And as a result of these choices, we've deferred maintenance and capital investment. And we're going to get into more of this in the next episode, and really what are the impact of these choices that you're going to see in the fiscal 27 budget, and then further on in fiscal 28 and beyond. All right, so thank you for watching part 2 on the past and how did we get here. It's a great way to set up part 3 on what's coming and why. Today we tried to really understand what has happened, what choices were made, how did we get to where we are today, and then you will see how this shapes what you're going to see in the fiscal 2027 budget on April 28th, and then also get a look at beyond 2027 and how our approach to debt. We're going to talk a lot about debt and how that will shape our future. So again, as a reminder, you can sign up for ACG, that stands for A Common Ground, emails. You can email us at forwoodbridge@gmail.com. You can also scan our QR code to check us out. And are you interested in getting involved? Would you like to roll up your sleeves? Please reach out with your questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions for future topics and updates. And we'd love to hear from you and for you to be a part of Common Ground. So we will see you on the next episode. Thanks.